The dragon, kneeling in front of Sharon, confesses his innermost feelings to her. He holds her hand, but the girl is silent. They are surrounded by many flowers, precious jewelry, gold coins, and a lovely ring with a large stone. The man says that as a sign of his love, he gives her his heart, and Sharon bows. The girl grabs the sword. The dragon, in horror, does not understand why she is doing this and does not have time to react. She pierces his chest. This is a story that is thousands of years old. A traveler stands on a hill looking at the city. A strange glow is visible in the sky, and the red stone in his hands begins to shine. He clenches the stone in his fist, saying, "This light, this is impossible. She's in danger." Village of the Knights of Chiron. The girl carries a clay jug on her head. The central square is crowded. Children are playing with the statue of a warrior. One child, who climbed almost onto the warrior's shoulders, began to brag to the guys that he was able to climb so high. The children were worried and asked him to get down. He replied that it was not dangerous. At this moment, his hand slips and he flies down. The girl catches him at the cost of her body, and they fall to the ground together. This girl was Aru. She scolded the children for such a stupid act. The children were crying. The boy, holding a wreath of flowers in his hands, said that they just wanted to give the knight a gift. Aru was surprised by their gift. She placed a wreath on the statue. The children joyfully thanked their sister Ara. The girl blushed lightly, grumbling that they should not run, otherwise they would definitely fall. She shouted after them, so that next time the children would just ask adults for help. Aru turned, looking at the statue, she thought, stately and magnificent, popular as always. The girl smiled, saying that she liked her too. About 1,000 years ago, she defeated an evil dragon and saved their world. The legendary heroine Sharon. She is the pride of the village of Chiron. That's why their town is named after her. And the lake is called the Tears of the Dragon. All the children grew up hearing the story of the hero. Aru was also among those children. Nowadays, only children believe in this fairy tale, but Aru was still proud of her heroine. The girl was wiping the statue's sign. Suddenly, something flashed behind her, and her jug, which was standing on the ground, broke. Arriving home, the evil aunt beat him with a broom and scolded Ara for the broken jug. She screamed why she even sheltered the children. They were no different from their parents, not forgetting to mention how tired she was of them. Aunt ordered Aru to at least wash the dishes so as not to seem so useless. While washing the dishes, Aru thought, the times when she played the hero were the best. Mom and Dad often played with them. They even made her a wooden sword and sewed a costume for her. She missed her parents very much. Tears appeared in the girl's eyes. She wiped them on the sleeve of her dress. Her brother crept up behind her. He closed her eyes and asked her to guess who it was. Zephyr notices tears on his sister's face. He lets her go and asks if she is crying or if he imagined it. Aru looks at her brother in fear. She is scared by how he sneaked up. The girl smiles and makes excuses. She insists that water got into her eyes while she was washing the dishes. She then asks if he has finished his business. The brother holds a handful of cookies wrapped in a scarf in his hands, hands them to his sister, and says that he brought these for her. Aru accepts the package. With one hand, she holds a handkerchief with cookies. With the other, she takes one of them and discovers that it is chocolate. The girl is pleasantly surprised by such a gift. While the sister begins to taste the cookies with pleasure, the brother says that he took them from the bakery and, since he doesn't like sweets, brought the cookies to her. Aru's mood improves. She is pleased with her brother's gift and thanks him. She is pleased that he is so sweet. Zephyr begins to help his sister with washing the dishes. The girl really likes the fact that he is nearby supporting her and helping her. Night falls. Aru can't sleep. She sits in her room on the edge of the bed, holding a small bag of coins on her lap. It was the money that her uncle and his wife secretly kept in their place. The girl looked at the money with enthusiasm. She realized that she would soon be 19 and hoped that sooner or later she and her brother would be able to leave here. Zephyr slept on the next bed all this time. Aru silently reassured herself that she just needed to be patient a little. There was noise in the house, and conversations could be heard outside the door. The girl opened the door slightly. She saw how her uncle and his wife were arguing. He had a bottle of alcohol in his hands. The uncle shouted to his wife that he was in big trouble. He said that he owed someone a large sum of money and was obliged to pay it today. Otherwise, their house and all their property would be taken away from them. The wife said excitedly that they didn't have a penny. A quarrel broke out between them. The wife blamed her uncle for losing everything again, and in response, her uncle threatened to beat her. With their screams, they woke up Zephyr. He woke up to look at what was happening. Clutching his head, the uncle looked for a way out of the situation. He was very irritated at that moment and had no idea how he could repay the debt. Suddenly, he turned his gaze to Ara, who was peeking out of her room. He came up with an idea on how to repay his debts with the help of a cute girl Aru. He approached her and, grabbing her hand, declared that the old man to whom he owed money wanted to get married. At that moment, Aru screamed in pain, and her brother hastened to intercede for her. The uncle claimed that the person to whom he owed money would be overjoyed if he found out that he had found him a young girl, and if he marries his niece, he will write off all his debts. The girl did not want to marry the old man to pay for the lost money. Here, Zephyr could not stand his uncle's behavior and hit him. After this, Aru managed to escape, and his uncle's wife grabbed a broom and began swinging at her brother, insulting him. Uncle fell to the floor, and Zephyr held him. He shouted to his sister to run away quickly. The girl ran into the room, where she opened the dresser drawer and began to collect things. She had no choice. She had to run away from there. At this time, a small light appeared outside the window of her room. Having quickly collected her things, taking the money with her, Aru was ready to leave and called Zephyr to go with her. The light from the street grew into a flame, becoming larger and larger. It was already difficult not to notice it. Looking out the window, the girl was a little confused and froze in surprise. She was surrounded by a pleasant red-orange warm light. Small sparks began to enter the room. A tongue of flame slowly approached from the street and froze in front of the girl. It looked like a fish. Aru looked at him carefully and did not understand what was happening. Suddenly, quickly, like a whirlwind, flames flared up around her. Her room was engulfed in flames. The girl only tried to cover herself with her hand. The house and everything around was completely engulfed in fire. Huge flames were hovering all around. It was necessary to get out of it at all costs. The uncle and his wife ran out into the street. In despair, he fell to his knees and began to mourn his house. He considered it his property. His wife told him to calm down and pick up the buckets. They tried to put out the fire, but it was all in vain. The fire only grew, and then together they decided to run away, fearing that they themselves might burn. Aru tried to get out of the house, making her way through the fire. She covered her face with her hand. It became hard to breathe. The girl coughed. Her lungs seemed to be torn from the inside. Choking and completely exhausted, not letting go of the bag with money, the girl sat down on the floor. It seemed strange to her, but she had the feeling that the flame was alive and was stretching out its hand to her. A fiery man actually appeared from the flames. He came closer to her and gently touched her cheek with his fiery palm. The girl's heart was pounding with excitement. She stretched out to meet him. Aru did not understand what was happening, but it seemed that she had already done this before. The man leaned towards her and wanted to kiss the girl. They were interrupted. It was a traveler in a white robe, he called out to Miss Ara. He burst into the room as if out of nowhere, and waving his weapon, drove away the fiery guest. A battle ensued between them. Tongues of flame attacked the traveler over and over again. He fought bravely, waving his weapon and destroying everything around him. Aru, completely exhausted and suffocating from the fire, fell to the floor and lost consciousness, and the flames were getting closer and closer. The traveler called out to her again, but she did not respond. Worried about her condition, he took her in his arms. The traveler told her to hold on, but the girl was still unconscious and could not respond. He wanted to do something to save her. Having walked around them from behind, the fiery entity chose the moment and decided to attack. The flame quickly rushed towards the traveler, but he managed to notice this maneuver in time and reacted. Swinging his weapon, the traveler stopped the flames. As a result of the blow, a surge of unprecedented force arose. Everything around shook, and the house began to collapse. Aru thought she heard a voice somewhere from the flames. After the battle, the traveler begins to come to his senses. He has suffered greatly. The house is gone. The fire has also gone out. There is only ashes and ruins all around. He fully comes to his senses, stands up, and looks around. After wandering among the destroyed house, the traveler does not find Miss Ara. She has disappeared. Frustrated by the girl's disappearance, he takes out a red stone and clutches it tightly. The traveler failed in his task. He had to save her. Night. A man with red eyes and dragon wings holds Aru in his arms. He looks at her and thinks they have met again, addressing her as Sharon. Aru finds herself in an unknown place. Around her, she sees banners and fallen warriors in armor with weapons. Fire is burning all around. The girl understands that she is on the battlefield. In the distance, she notices how, among the flames, a creature with large wings soars above itself, another torn victim, bleeding. It notices the girl and heads towards her. The shadow of the creature fell on Ara. Up close it was even larger. She became very scared. She was numb with horror and could not run. Waking up in bed, Aru exhales and wipes his forehead. The girl realizes that it was just a dream. Finding unfamiliar objects around him, he begins to suspect that he is in someone else's bed. Turning her head to the right, the girl finds a sleeping man next to her, who hugs her around the waist. She immediately excitedly removes the man's hand and stands up. Aru is confused about who this man is, what this place is, and why she is here. The man wakes up and sees that the girl is no longer in bed. Looking around the room, he realizes that she is missing. Armed with a large indoor candlestick, Aru hid behind the screen. The girl was still coming to her senses. She was haunted by questions about what happened and why she was here. She remembered how her uncle wanted to pay off the debt with her help, and then a terrible fire started in their house. Aru decided that she had been sold for debts, and that the man in the bed was that old man. Getting out of bed, he walked towards her. Deciding that she had been noticed, she prepared herself. The room was dark and difficult to see, but despite this, she was determined to hit him with all her might as soon as she came closer. Aru jumped out from behind the screen and rushed to attack the man. She screamed, called him names, and said that she would never be with him. If he touched her, then she was not responsible for herself. Swinging a candlestick, the girl misses, piercing the empty room as if it were not there. Aru stands wondering where he could have gone. She was sure that he had just been here. The man was already standing behind her, quietly leaning towards her to make himself known, and said that he was here. The girl was very scared and screamed loudly. He snatches the candlestick from Aru. Numb with fear, the girl froze. She remained standing as if nothing had been taken from her hands. The man raised his hand to light the candles. Aru did not yet know that he had such abilities and began to defend herself, waving and covering herself with her hands. Having calmed down a little, realizing that they were not going to beat her, squinting one eye, the girl tried to make out her captor. He was a slender, black-haired young man, a head taller than Aru, and he had beautiful red eyes. He looked at the girl as if he had seen her not for the first time. The man spoke. He asked if she was breathing. The girl was confused and thought that he was crazy, but then she remembered that terrible fire. She began to remember how she was told to hold on, how she was choking on the smoke. If she was here, then someone had to save her. She couldn't do it herself. Then Aru, thinking, poked her finger in the stranger's face and assumed that he was the warrior in a white robe who protected her from the flames. The girl realized that it was not polite to point a finger and removed her hand. She was embarrassed because she could have been wrong, but asked again if he was the person who saved her during the fire. Completely confused, Aru stood and looked at the young man in confusion. She thought that he bought her, but it turns out that he saved her. The man reassured her, saying that she was now safe. She thanked him again and asked if he was injured. He looked at the girl silently. Aru then asked him to say his name. The young man said his name was Dusk. Suddenly, the girl's stomach growled loudly. This was very inopportune. She became embarrassed in a way that she considered rude. Dusk asked Aru if she was hungry. The girl was still shy and said that she didn't want to eat. Then he invited her to come with him, to which he received a positive response. Taking the girl by the shoulders, they left the room together. The hand with which he hugged Aru began to become covered with scales for a while and looked like a monster's paw, from which a radiance emerged. Aru calmed down a little. Twilight no longer seemed scary. She was worried about something else. When she heard his name, her heart began to beat faster, and she worried a little more so that her stomach would not growl again. The young man's hand regained its human form, the glow gradually diminishing until it disappeared completely. Dusk was disappointed. He thought that the time had not yet come. They come to the large hall. The girl admires the huge house. The man sits her down at a large dining table laden with a variety of delicacies. Aru is delighted with such an abundance of food. Dusk leaned towards her and asked if she needed more food. The table was filled with goodies. Aru politely refused, thanked her for the dinner. That was enough for her. She looked at him and tried to mentally guess what he was doing, how he had such a luxurious house, excellent food, and clean, expensive clothes. The girl thought that he looked a little out of this world. Aru began asking Dusk about his mansion. She had not heard of it before and wanted to know where it was located. He replied that his house was not far from where she lived. Continuing to bore him with her questions, she wanted to know that at that moment, as he saved her, perhaps there were other people who could have been saved. The girl recalled that a fire caught fire in the room where she was, and the flames blocked her path. At this time, other family members were in the living room, so they could easily get out. Without a doubt, everyone should be safe and sound, but she felt uneasy in her heart. In particular, she asked if Mr. Dusk had seen the young man. Aru was very worried about her brother. The young man replied that he had not seen anyone except her. The girl was upset. She didn't understand how this was even possible, because besides Aru, there were 3 other people there. The girl cried because no one else could get out of the house except her. Through her tears, she prayed for everyone else to be safe and sound. After lunch, they went out into the courtyard. Aru continued to chat. At first, she believed that she was in a mansion, but it turned out to be a whole castle with a huge territory. She asked Dusk if he lived here alone. The girl told him that having a family might not always be a good thing. Aru was still angry at the thought that they were going to sell her like some kind of thing. The man listened patiently to the girl. She told him how her uncle lost her parents' property and took away the money he earned every day. She then noticed that she was talking a lot and thanked Dusk for listening. The young man asked Aru if she remembered anything about him or this place. The girl thought about it. She didn't remember well what happened to her after she lost consciousness. She said that if she remembered anything before returning home, she would immediately tell him and thanked him for his salvation and kindness. Dusk couldn't just let the girl go. He really needed her. Suddenly there was an explosion. Some incredible force hit the castle in which Aru and Dusk were located, destroying part of it. There was a protective barrier around the castle. In front of him stood a traveler who was trying to save Miss Ara in the house. He swung his weapon and delivered a powerful blow. The blow was so strong that it was able to cut a small gap in the barrier. This was not enough, and besides, it quickly closed. The traveler struck blow after blow and began to call Miss Aru, but he could not destroy the barrier and get inside. He was a little depressed since he was unsuccessful again. Due to blows from outside, the castle began to collapse. Dusk was able to repel the falling stones. He was wondering who was so persistently trying to break through to them. He knew that an ordinary person could not do this. Frightened, Aru called him for help. The young man rushed to the girl, threw her to the ground, and covered her with his body. Hanging over her, Dusk's clothes fell open, and she saw his slender, muscular body up close. Frozen in amazement, they looked at each other. Aru was very excited. He was so close that the girl even felt his breath. The girl remembered how once in her childhood, one fine sunny day, she was hanging out her laundry and someone called her an alarm. It was her friend Ruby. She was incredibly excited. The girl said that somewhere there were big problems and a complete rush. Aru tried to find out from her what happened. A friend grabbed Ara's hand. She told her not to waste time on empty chatter, but to follow her in order to quickly show something very important. Several half-naked young men gathered in one place. They were all in good physical shape and flexing their muscles in the sun. It turns out that by big trouble, Ruby meant the bathing men who had gathered on the riverbank. All the young girls of the village came to see this. They were hiding on a hill. The friend playfully asked Aru how she felt about what was happening and whether she was grateful to her for this, because if it weren't for Ruby, the girl would have missed everything. The guys noticed the girls. They didn't mind their presence. One of the guys noticed Ara among the girls and happily told everyone that she had come too. Ruby shouted at him to quickly take off his clothes. They shouted back to her that if the ladies ask, then it is the duty of the men to satisfy their demand to undress. The other girls were delighted with what they saw. Aru, on the contrary, was of little interest in what was happening. Ruby was admired by one of the guys. He was snow-white and tall, like a statue. She asked her friend if she had seen him too. The girls began to ask Ara why she had no reaction to men. They began to ask her about her relationship with one of the bathing guys, who had previously confessed his love to her. They wanted to know why the girl wasn't dating him. Aru became completely embarrassed and said that she likes men with toned chest muscles. After seeing the beautiful torso of Mr. Dusk, the girl disappeared into her dreams and fantasies. She seemed to be in the clouds at that moment. Dusk thought that if the uninvited guest had not shaken the barrier, he was going to show her his true appearance. But now, the most reliable option would be to continue hiding, chain her somewhere in the dark, and wait for the right moment. The man wanted to know if she had time to see how he was reincarnated. At the moment of impact, his body reacted on its own to protect her from danger. Having survived the explosion, they began to come to their senses, holding their heads. Dusk asked Aru if she was hurt. The girl replied that she was fine, although she was a little shocked. She politely asked if the young man was okay. Without answering, he only assumed that an earthquake had just occurred and extended his hand to help her get up. Taking his hand, Aru was surprised. She could not understand why her hand was covered in abrasions, while his was absolutely clean, and there was not even a hint of a small scratch, although they almost died due to the collapse. Apologizing for his tactlessness, Dusk takes the girl in his arms. Perplexed, she asks him what he is doing. The man replied that this was repair work. He covered her eyes with his hand and asked her to wait a little. He said that the house had been empty for a long time, so it was a terrible mess. After that, everything around began to shine, and Aru's chest began to glow with a red glow. The destroyed parts of the castle and the damaged barrier began to be restored around. At that moment, the girl's heart began to beat a little faster, and a slightly tickling feeling appeared. Everything stopped. Dusk removed his hand from her face and informed her that he was finished. They met their gaze again and looked at each other with bated breath. Aru asked to be placed on the ground. Such contact seemed too close to her. The man agreed and put the girl down. Having dropped to the ground, the girl discovers that the earthquake has stopped, and all the destroyed buildings stand as if nothing had happened. Offering to continue the interrupted conversation, Dusk says that there is no need to return to the house in which she lived initially if she does not like it and she can stay here. The man suggested that those who were unpleasant to her might again intend to take advantage of her because they had already tried to sell Ara to a man whom she did not want to see as her betrothed. He doesn't want her to go through anything like that again. The girl thanked him for his concern. She thought he was too kind-hearted. Aru asks Mr. Dusk to go back inside first. She would like to take a little walk alone. A man enters the castle. He reproaches himself for what he does. Dusk doubts the need to create such difficulties. Looking out the window, the young man sees Ara running away, calling her Sharon. He became alarmed because he did not understand where and why she was going. The girl ran away from the castle. She was alarmed by many incomprehensible things around. An unprecedented castle in a sparsely populated place, and a man who lived there alone without servants. It was strange. She considered Mr. Dusk only as one who pretended to be a good person. She clearly saw with her own eyes how he turned into a monster. Aru suggested that perhaps the monster was only pretending to be human, but in fact wanted to eat the girl if she continued to stay here. The monster was just stalling for time. He would have been sorry to eat her right away. She believed that he was just going to fatten her up well, and only then devour her. Dusk went out into the street, spread his wings and flew higher, looking after Aru as she ran away. He thought her hopes of escaping were foolish and mentally called the girl Sharon again. In the large hall, there are several guardians in white robes. The chief priest holds a staff with a red stone on top in his hand. The rest kneel before him and report an urgent report. He was told that in the mountains to the northwest in the 3rd region in the village of Shiran, there was a fire of unknown origin, and the guardian who was there immediately responded. From the report, the priest realized that the dragon, which Sharon destroyed by sacrificing her own life, called a natural disaster, had risen again. Those present blamed themselves for how this could happen, since their direct responsibility was to find the heart before him. They believed that they had no excuse. Having calmed the guardians, the chief priest said that they still had time, since the dragon had not yet been able to put the heart into its chest. This will be their last chance to stop him. He then ordered everyone present to take the heart before the dragon was fully reborn. The guardians pledged to do this for the sake of the tomorrow of their world. While fleeing the castle, Aru came across unknown ancient ruins. She decides to look around a little. She would like to know the exact location of such beauty. Among the ruins she finds writings, but she is unable to read them. The girl decides to move on and enjoys the beauty of this place. After looking around, she realizes that she may not find any clues here, and perhaps she should move on. But suddenly, she discovers a cross overgrown with grass. It was a grave that attracted the girl. Ara feels sorry because there is no one who could take care of the grave. She touches the cross and immediately sees a bright light. The grass falls off it, and it turns out that it was a large sword. Having taken off above the girl, he hovered briefly in the air, and she was able to see him. A bright light emanated from the sword. Its hilt was gilded, and a red stone was inserted into it. Again, everything around shook and began to collapse. The stones under the girl's feet began to crack. The girl grabbed the sword. She was afraid that an earthquake had started again. Suddenly, Aru felt a strong pain in her chest, as if she had been pierced by something, and began to fall down. The girl fell into a hole that had formed there. When she came to her senses, it was painful for her to walk, but she was glad that she got off so easily. On the ground, she discovers the same sword. It no longer flew. Aru was sure that it was he who pierced her through, but there was no wound. Something was approaching Aru very quickly, with great force, and a roar it fell next to her, raising clouds of dust. The girl still managed to cover herself with her hands. The dust began to clear. Aru saw Dusk in the guise of a monster. He had large wings, like a dragon, huge claws protruding from his fingers, and horns on his head. The girl carried Dusk into the shadow of the forest thicket. He felt touches on his face. Someone was wiping the blood from him. Opening his eyes slightly, he discovered a girl. He dreamed of Sharon. She screamed if Mr. Dusk had come to his senses. The man immediately opened his eyes. He saw a familiar sword in Aru's hands. In surprise, he wanted to jump, but found that he was chained to a tree by a vine. Frightened, the girl jumped back. Dusk asked what she was doing. Aru awkwardly replied that he suddenly fell from the sky. She felt scared, so she decided to tie him up. He sighed heavily, asking her to remove the bonds, because he would not harm her. There was an awkward pause. He asked if she could hear him. Aru plucked up her courage and still said that initially she was going to tie him up and run away, but she still decided to stay to talk to him. That's why she can't untie him. Dusk emphasized that all this looked crazy. He asked what she wanted from him. He thought that the vines with which he was bound were not able to hold him, but if she escaped, he would only have more unnecessary troubles. Aru pointed her sword at him, demanding answers to questions about what his true identity is and for what purpose he brought it here. And she was also interested in how to return home. The man said his name, emphasizing that he had nothing more to say about himself. He thought Aru called him a good man, but as soon as she saw his true form, she immediately pointed her sword at him. The girl tensed, demanding to move on to the next question. The man said, the reason he took her with him. Dusk turned away from her indifferently. He cannot voice it, but as soon as he deals with all the matters, he will immediately release her. If this is important to Aru, he agrees to make a promise. The girl was extremely outraged by his answer. She angrily told him not to talk nonsense, asking her to stay here while she doesn't know what ever happened to her family. Dusk replied that if she kills him, she will never be able to get out of here. With a stern expression on his face, he emphasized that her compassion was not the only reason she did not abandon him to his fate. She probably felt it while wandering through the forest. Peace and quiet, where you can't hear any birds or insects. Feeling of incompatibility. The different space he created. Without his permission, no one can enter here, and no one can leave. There's no other way to get out of here. This made Aura very angry. She thought what he said was like some kind of magic. It started to rain, which quickly turned into downpour. Dusk asked if they should end the conversation here. In any case, from her appearance, you can tell that she has difficulty moving. Aru suffered a serious bruise to his leg. After hesitating a little, she agreed. First, they had to return to the castle. Returning to the castle, Dusk was still tied up with vines. The girl threw a towel over him and looked out the window at the rain. He asked if she was going to untie him. Aru answered in the negative. She walked up to the man and began rubbing his hair with a towel. The girl asked where the wounds on his chest came from. Dusk answered dryly that he did not know this. She wondered if this had something to do with what happened in the ruins. There was a pause between them, each thinking about his own. Dusk had a thought. Is this a coincidence or an irony of fate? Why, while running away, Aru ended up in those ruins with that ill-fated sword? He never thought that she would be here, in the ruins that were once the place where he confessed his feelings to Sharon. Aru pulled the sword from the stone, and unbearable pain erupted in Dusk's chest, and he began to fall down. Dusk sat in front of the girl with a towel on his head in silence. Aru thought it would be worth changing her wet clothes. He can't do it on his own because he's tied up. She was horrified by the realization that she would have to do this herself. She hesitated. Aru said, "If Mr. Dusk remains like this, then there is a chance that he will get sick. Therefore, you need to change your clothes." She cautiously asked if he understood her. The man did not answer. Aru began to take off his wet clothes, her cheeks turning red. Aru thought, "You just need to close your eyes and take it off with your eyes closed. Don't pay attention. Besides, Mr. Dusk is not a person." The girl now felt it necessary to imagine that she was bathing Poppy, Ruby's puppy. However, he has very toned muscles. She touched his chest. This is because in front of her is the body of a man, not a monster. Sliding his hands over his shoulders, the man could not resist saying that it tickled. He didn't even think that Aru had such a side of his character that he would do something like this when they were alone here. The girl was embarrassed and jumped back sharply. Dusk freed himself from the vine and grabbed her hand. The girl did not understand when he managed to free himself from his bonds. They fell to the floor. The man hung over her, holding her hands, saying that the jokes were over. He didn't know whether he had to be too naive or too stupid to be sure that she could restrain him with the help of such flimsy vines. She was very nervous. Dusk released his claws, emphasizing that she listened to him carefully. He will put an end to their annoying fatal relationship. He called the girl by the name of Sharon and moved even closer. The man added that he would return what was rightfully his. He ordered her to return his heart, which she took, pointing his fingers at her chest. Aru had absolutely no idea what he was talking about. The dragon is a strong and fierce creature that has been written about since ancient times and is now a legend. Before the warrior Sharon, there was no one who could resist the dragon. Therefore, the source of this power was the heart of the dragon. As a result, the dragon's heart constantly created the fundamental magical force that moves this world, and the dragon that controls the power is like a flame that never goes out and burns forever. Aru remembered how, as a child, an adult told a story about the warrior Sharon, how she confidently ran up and tore out the dragon's heart. She assumed, based on that story, that Mr. Dusk, even among monsters, is not some mediocre fry, but a dragon. On the day when the dragon's heart broke, he lost his heart, screamed in pain, and turned into a handful of ashes, leaving behind only a small spark wandering around the world. And after 1,000 years, the dragon found Sharon. He was burning with the desire to immediately tear out his heart. He passed his hand over Aru's chest, but the fragments had not yet fully glued together. Need more time. He allows her to live until the recovery process is complete. Aru began to beat Dusk with her free hand and legs, demanding to let her go, but he was motionless, like a rock. Aru didn't want to die this way. The dragon is going to take her heart. It seemed to her unimaginable nonsense. Dusk got angry. He said that thinking about old feelings, he didn't want to harm her, but she doesn't know how to obey at all. He roughly grabbed her leg, and the girl screamed. He said angrily, apparently he would have to break Era's legs so that she would stop playing her useless tricks. The girl was in great pain, she screamed, begging for help. The traveler's stone glowed with a fiery color. He swung his scythe and destroyed the dragon's barrier. Having dropped to the ground, he rushed forward to help Miss Aru. Dusk felt the damage to the barrier. He stood up, freeing the frightened girl, and ordered her to get up, change into dry clothes, and wait for him. He turned to her, half transformed into a dragon. His eyes were red. His skin began to become covered with scales, and horns appeared. He said that he would deal with the small bug and come back. Dusk flew through the forest area in search of the intruding creature. A thunderstorm broke out. Dusk found a gap in the barrier. No doubt an outsider had invaded. However, he did not feel any foreign energy. He could not understand where the foreign creature was hiding. The dragon fired bursts of magic in search of the intruder. There was no one, but no one could hide from his sharp eyes. The traveler below looked at the dragon. He didn't even think that the day would come when he would be able to see it live. Dusk said loudly, addressing the intruder, "He is good at playing hide and seek, but finding him is only a matter of time." And he summoned many dragons to help, ordering them to drag the intruding person to him, emphasizing that he would be satisfied with a lifeless body. Aru walked around the castle looking for a way out. She found huge doors and tried to open them, but it was no use. Her ankle was in pain, and she was frozen to the bone. She saw a fiery glow and turned around. It was twilight. He asked why she was wandering around here without asking, because he asked her to wait for him in the room. Aru answered tremblingly that she was worried about her little brother. The girl was afraid of him. She didn't even notice when he came. If he found out that she tried to escape, he would hurt her again. He extended his hand to her. Aru was frightened and closed her eyes. A towel appeared on her head. Opening her eyes, she saw that Dusk was simply drying her hair. He said that she would catch a cold like that and suggested that they go back. The next day, while Aru was sleeping, Dusk enjoyed smoking tobacco and thought about what had happened. He believed that this also happened sometimes. And among people, individuals with unusual magical powers are also born. But even so, there was one thing that haunted him. His thoughts were interrupted by a change in his body. He looked at his hand and saw his fingers begin to dissipate like ashes. He clenched his hand into a fist, believing that he needed a heart. He needed to go to Sharon. Heading towards the exit, the man remembered Sharon, who was frightened by him. Although he brought her breakfast, he had no idea whether she even touched the food. Meanwhile, the girl begins to awaken. Aru saw the breakfast table neatly set for her, her stomach giving an audible command to eat everything. She pounced on the food, believing that now was not the time to be nagging. She needed more strength. After breakfast, she sat by the window, thinking that she was not going to sit meekly and wait, so she looked for ways to escape. Although getting out of the castle is quite problematic, but even if you can get out of the fortress, there are no less problems outside. What was more important for Aru was that she was not Sharon at all. Sharon lived 1,000 years ago. Even if that dragon grabbed the wrong target, wouldn't it take too long for him to realize the mistake he had made? Aru believed that the only thing that connected her with the warrior Sharon was that they were born in the same settlement. And even with a 1,000-year time difference, she is determined to escape. Having collected some provisions and a sword, she began to stuff them under the bed. It seemed to Aru that Dusk was not going to harm her yet. Therefore, you need to carefully assess the situation and begin to act. There was a sudden knock on the door, and the girl, frightened, rushed to the table, pretending that she had just eaten. She allowed her to enter, and Dusk asked if she had eaten. Aru silently looked at him with a withering gaze. She was waiting for the moment when he would lower his guard and show her at least some weak spot or gap in the defense. Dusk saw that the plates were empty, which meant she wasn't refusing to eat, and her body also looked fine, but he didn't understand why she was looking at him so hatefully. He extended his hand to her to check if the girl had a fever, wondering if she was sick. Aru hit him with a pillow and screamed, ordering him to stand where he was standing. Having caught the table with his foot, it split in two. All the dishes fell to the floor. The pillow in Aru's hands was torn in half, and the candelabra fell. Twilight tensed. Aru was surprised at her unprecedented strength. The man looked at his hands. He thought that, of course, he was trying to intimidate her, but the current situation puts him in a difficult position. After all, in this situation, he cannot receive the strength of the heart. Was she really so disgusted by the idea of him touching her? His face became stern. He thought that they would later find out who was who, calling Aru a simple creature. If he just wants to, he can deal with such a bug in an instant. He again reached out his hand to the girl. Horror was visible on her face. Tears were filling her eyes. She was clutching the remains of the pillow in her hands. Dusk, seeing this, was surprised. Saying again this expression on his face, he retreated and walked away, closing the door behind him. He thought what a disgusting feeling this was. The man clutched his clothes in the area of his heart. He ordered himself to come to his senses. A millennium lasts much longer than it seems. After the day when the warrior pierced his heart with a sword, he suffered for many years in pain as his body was torn into small pieces. He laughed, saying there was no turning back now. "It's time to end it all," he called out to Sharon. Only by killing her with his own hands can he regain his heart. Aru planned to continue further preparations for her escape. Getting up, she realized that her leg was completely fine. This seemed very strange to her because the injury was quite serious, and she couldn't be healed in one day. And what was extremely surprising was that she felt great. Throwing on fire and falling off a cliff, she has gone through so many hardships, but at the same time energy is surging out of her. Is she too healthy? Suddenly the door opened sharply. Dusk was heading towards it. He demanded a conversation. He brought into the room a lot of gifts, dresses, various sweets. Aru asked what all this was. Crossing his arms over his chest, the man indifferently said that she could take everything for herself because he didn't need these things. If there is something she wants, she just has to say it. He will try to make her stay here as comfortable as possible. Aru looked at him, thinking that this was all somehow too suspicious. He said he was going to take her heart, so why such generosity? The sweets looked expensive and tasty. He definitely doesn't need clothes decorated with precious stones. Dusk asked if she liked the gifts. He emphasized that if you don't like something, he will bring something else. Aru looked sadly at the dress. She couldn't say that she didn't like it. She asked where the gentleman got everything he brought. Dusk replied, the things were offerings from people to him. Although a lot of time has passed since then, a preservation spell has been cast on them. After all, you never know what might be useful to you. Aru said that she still finds it hard to believe that he is a real dragon. The legend describes him as strong, formidable, ferocious, merciless, irritable, and selfish. The man noticed that he had become famous among people as a notorious villain. Not a single good word was said about him. Aru felt a little awkward, but she really wanted to ask what kind of person the heroine Sharon was. She heard that she was very tall, brave, and incredibly strong. Dusk was horrified by her words. He asked if the girl called Sharon a heroine. Aru panicked. She realized that her question was impolite towards the dragon because she had killed him. He asked the girl to tell him everything she knew about Sharon, and then he would answer her. She told him a story famous in her village, and she asked if Sharon wasn't amazing. She didn't know what Dusk thought about this, but in their village every child dreamed of being like her, so she became curious about what she was like. Aru was very embarrassed. She didn't know what to do. Dusk looked saddened. After an awkward silence, he asked if the one who did something like that became a heroine. He couldn't believe it. Aru was surprised. Dusk said, as he promised, he will tell her about Sharon. That girl was short and weak. She was afraid even of her own shadow and cried constantly. She was as far away as the moon from becoming a hero, and in general, she was a person who had difficulty understanding even her own heart. And at the very end, she fully showed her disgusting nature. Aru was indignant, saying how dare he, even if he lost, but how dare he humiliate the greatest warrior. She trembled with anger. She continued, does Mr. Dusk really want to say that the heroine Sharon was a weak coward and a crybaby? She screamed, Sharon was 2.5 meters tall, brave and sensible, which with one hand broke mountains and divided seas. She was a sensitive and kind, fair person who shed tears only when she cared about the weak and poor. Dusk was dumbfounded. He could not swallow the information that Aru was carrying because it looked too crazy. He assumed she was joking, but looking at Era, the man understood that she was saying all this completely seriously. He thought that humans had always been good at scratching with their tongues. He sighed heavily. Over the course of 1,000 years, they managed to create a well-thought-out delusional story. Dusk said that recently all he hears from her is heroine and warrior. Sharon was not a warrior, but a princess. He said decisively, if Aru so badly wants to become the same as Sharon, does this mean that she also wants to take the life of the dragon? The girl was surprised. This question was extremely unexpected for her. She did not know how to answer. After thinking, she said, if she were as strong as Sharon, then, of course. Dusk's eyes became wild. His skin began to become covered with scales. And the girl awkwardly continued, she would like to do something. She asked if he would laugh if she said this. Aru asked the gentleman to come closer, patting the seat of the sofa next to her. Dusk sat down next to him. She whispered in his ear, if she were as strong a warrior as Sharon, then she would try to tame the dragon. Dusk was surprised. He looked at the girl. Aru smiled sweetly at him. Her cheeks turned red, and he couldn't believe if she really said what he heard. As a child, the girl dreamed of becoming a great warrior and being stronger than a dragon, which means she could tame it. She shared her thoughts with her brother Zephyr. Aru believed that she could re-educate the formidable creature. If the dragon did bad things, she would scold him, and for good ones, as a reward, she was going to feed him delicious meat. When the dragon began to obey her unquestioningly, she was going to climb on it and then fly everywhere on it. She told this story to Dusk. He lowered his head and covered his eyes with his hand. Dusk was confused and did not know what to answer the girl. Aru, on the contrary, was delighted, because he was also a dragon, although he looked like a man. She thought that Dusk was angry, but instead he turned, leaned closer to her, and invited the girl to try to tame him. The girl froze at such a sudden proposal. She had no idea where to start, because until now she was afraid of Mr. Dusk, so yelling at him was not an option. Then she decides to start praising him. In a joking manner, Aru began scratching his chin with her fingertips and stroking his head, which confused Dusk. Having praised him well, the girl told Dusk to behave well, and asked him to take her on his back to fly, which caused his surprise even more. Aru took off sitting on the man's back. She was beside herself with happiness, which could not be said about Twilight. Although he believed that he needed strength, he did not understand why he chose this particular method. Pointing to the mountain peaks, the girl asked Dusk to fly to them. He refused, since that place was located next to the barrier, and if he went there, Aru could get hurt. Looking at his hand, filled with a red glow, Dusk thought that recovery was going slowly, and caught himself thinking that he couldn't babysit the girl forever and indulge her whims. He looked at her, considering the option of solving everything by force. Dusk wasn't worried about having to tie her up and watch her cry, but if Aru resisted, it would only add to the problems. Among the ruins of the burnt house, the search for Zephyr and Aru continued. They could not be found. This was strange, since at least the bodies should have remained. It felt like they just evaporated. Uncle didn't care what happened to them. He believed that Aru herself started the fire and ran away, vilely repaying the fact that he and his wife sheltered and raised her. He continued to drink alcohol and tell others that it was not worth leaving Zephyr and his sister, who had lost their parents, under his roof. Ruby was indignant. She exclaimed in defense of her friend that she did not consider her a bad person, and her uncle could once again inspect the surroundings, since he was still standing around drinking alcohol. Uncle tried to put Ruby in her place. He had his own point of view. Ruby hoped that Aru and Zephyr were still alive, but she was haunted by the thought of why there was no trace of them. While enjoying the flight, Aru noticed that the forest was truly endless. There are no traces of human presence visible. She became upset, wondering if she would be able to return home. Aru knew now was not the right time for something like this, but not for long, only for a brief moment, because this was her long-standing dream. She really wanted to take a cool pose while flying on the back of a dragon, and Aru rose to her feet, putting her hands forward. The girl was very happy about her childhood dream coming true, but Dusk had his own opinion about the current situation, and he turned over, throwing her off his back into free flight. Aru began to wave her arms, screaming in fear, when suddenly Dusk flew up to her and took her in his arms, asking if she treated him like a riding horse. The girl was embarrassed. She hugged his neck, explaining that this was no longer important. Dusk hinted that she shouldn't test him. He sarcastically asked if taming was more difficult than she thought. Aru remained silent in embarrassment. They began to go down. Lowering Era to the ground, she sees that it is a beautiful meadow dotted with various flowers. Dusk noticed that nothing had changed here at all in 1,000 years. Aru ran across the meadow. The man grabbed her by the collar, asking where she was going. The girl answered plaintively to go to the toilet. He let her go, ordering her not to go far. It seemed to him that she was up to something again. Aru walked through the forest and was very angry. She was sure that she would be able to see her village during the flight, but let alone the lake, even the shadow of the lake was not visible. She came across a river, believing that if she walked along the shore, she could reach some settlement. However, she understood that Dusk would immediately catch up with her. Walking further, she notices part of the river covered with blocks of ice. Aru was very frightened when she looked and saw winged monsters of twilight in the ice. Lowering her head, she sees footprints on the ground. Without a doubt, the traces were left quite recently. This means there is a person somewhere nearby. Aru was relieved. She thought that if she found that person, she could ask for help, and perhaps she will be able to return home. A noise was heard, and a piece of ice above the girl broke. Dusk began to think that Aru had been taking too long to return. The girl was lying on the ground. There were many shards of ice around her. When she woke up, she realized that a large piece of ice had fallen on her. She looked at the huge pieces and didn't understand how it could fall on her head and not hurt her. Did she really have such a strong head? The girl remembered the incident with the table broken in half. She walked up to a large block and hit it with her fist. The ice crumbled into pieces. Aru felt a surge of energy, but now her body was filled with incredible power. She felt a little strange. She wondered, as Mr. Dusk had said, if she really was some kind of reincarnation of the great warrior. But if you look at it differently, he and Mr. Twilight are sworn enemies. Suddenly, everything swam before Aru's eyes. She felt an unbearable pain in her chest. Aru clutched her dress around her heart, sweating profusely. Suddenly, her eyes opened wide. They were filled with hatred. The girl returned to Dusk. He turned around, asking if she had lost her way. Aru's gaze was as if she was not herself. Looking at the man, she thought that she needed a sword. Out of nowhere, the same sword from the ruins magically appeared in her hands. She took a stance and began swinging it. Suddenly, Dusk handed her a flower. He said that while she was gone, he looked around and saw that it was blooming. Out of embarrassment, he did not dare turn his face to her. The man asked if she liked this flower as much as before. Aru froze, then fell to the ground. There were traces of blood on her dress, which greatly frightened the dragon. Aru was in agony. The whole body seems to be on fire. She feels like her heart is about to break into pieces. Opening her eyes, she sees a fiery man in front of her. He touches her face gently, then hugs her. She doesn't know who he is, but he's so soft and warm. She feels better. Waking up, Aru discovers that she is in the castle. Dusk is holding her in his arms. She asks him what happened, noticing traces of blood on her hands. The girl jumps away from the dragon and begins to scream furiously. Seeing that not only her hands are covered in blood, she is seized with panic. Dusk shouted that Sharon should not make any sudden movements. Otherwise, there would be a release of mana again. The girl looked at him questioningly. The man explained that because of his heart, too much magical power had accumulated in her body. He told Aru to cuddle up to him. He will take her for himself. He didn't expect something like this to happen. Mana is life energy. It shouldn't have had such a destructive influence on her. Aru trembled. Tears flowed from her eyes. She said that she was in pain, unbearably in pain. She was worried about whether she might die. Dusk pressed the girl to his chest, calming her down. He said that she had nothing to worry about. As long as she was next to him, nothing bad would happen. A little bit later, walking through the castle, Mr. Dusk still can't stand it and asks Sharon, who is stuck to his back, whether it's necessary to hang on him like that. He emphasized that the girl is just like a cicada on an old tree. Aru asked the master not to pay attention to her. She was just a little anxious, so she could not move away from him. Dusk thought how it was possible not to get hung up on something like that, but was silent. Aru remembered Dusk's words earlier that it would not be bad if she herself knew how to handle magic. To release the excess mana from her body, he has no choice but to touch her. He needs physical contact to take away someone else's magic. The larger the contact area, the easier it is. When contacting a naked body, the effect will be better. The girl blushed and pressed herself even closer to him. Sharp pain, as if death had overtaken her. She did not want to feel anything like that anymore. Therefore, she hoped that everything would be okay if she contacted him in this way. Dusk looked at the girl. He emphasized that she liked hanging on his back. He sat her in a chair, hovering over her. He continued. He preferred this option. He said he didn't want her out of his sight. Aru thought that he could not open his back to the enemy. They ate side by side. We walked around the castle, holding hands. They collected fruits together. Dusk held Era on his shoulders, and she collected. Resting after lunch, they lay together on the sofa, Aru lying directly on the dragon. The man was annoyed that she was behaving too carelessly while she was sleeping peacefully, but this surprised him little. He often observed how people suddenly began to behave differently in order to survive. Dusk looked at Aru's face, turning away sharply. He thought that he didn't care. It was even better. He can calmly wait for the moment when his heart is finally restored. The girl began coughing up blood. Dusk rushed to her, not understanding why this was happening to Sharon, because he absorbed her magical power. Taking the girl in his arms, he felt that mana was slowly growing. He didn't understand why this was happening, whether hugs weren't enough. He noticed the magical chains that wrapped around Aru's body and the heart inside her. Dusk was furious that someone could do such a thing to a girl. He blamed himself for not noticing these chains right away. Grasping them tightly, the man was able to break the chain that bound her. Immediately, the room and the entire castle were filled with a pleasant warm light. Aru came to her senses and felt light. Dusk explained to her that the wizards with whom she could contact somewhere had put a magical seal on her heart that sealed her magical power. He hugged the girl, reassured her that everything was okay now, and suggested she lie there for a while, hugging her. Aru thanked him. She was pleased that Dusk was worried about her. Now that there were no chains, magical power began to fill Dusk more. He felt a strong surge of mana, freshness and strength, as if his heart had been restored again. In the castle courtyard, Aru accurately threw several pieces of wood into the basket for the fire, boasting about this to Dusk, and using her magic, she decided to ignite a stronger flame. Without calculating her magical power, the girl created a large flash of flame. Aru got scared and covered her face with her hands. A few sparks hit her hair and it caught fire. Dusk rushed to put out the flames. Aru was happy because after that day she learned to use magic, and although she understood little, it was now clear that she had her own power. Taking the girl's hand, the man noticed that the skin was all cracked. He asked if she was in pain. The girl smiled and said that it was nothing. After a moment, the scratches healed. It seemed to Aru that after a couple of days, Mr. Dusk became somehow strange. Although the girl could use magical power, she still understood that this power originally belonged to him. They got into the boat and went for a walk. The girl tried to transfer part of the magical power to him from a distance, but nothing worked. She believed that if she could transfer the existing power to him at a distance, then in that case, there would be no need to take her heart. Dusk leaned over and offered Aru a hug, since today he had never taken away her mana. The girl sat down in his arms, put her head on his shoulder, and felt sad. She asked to be returned home because she missed her brother and friends. Dusk said that with such a body she should not be released. Then she came up with the idea that Mr. Dusk should live with them and direct his incredible power to good deeds. Then people would begin to treat him differently. Aru beamed with happiness. She said that then she would be able to embrace him every day, and if she died of old age, he would be able to take her heart. Dusk did not like this idea. He told the girl how he destroyed entire cities of people, and he wanted to tear anyone who crossed his path to shreds. The girl completely drooped. She believed that she could become a friend for Mr. Dusk, and friends should not kill each other. Aru became frustrated with her foolish attempts to tame him. Clutching his fist tightly, Dusk looked helplessly at the girl. He could not console her. A variety of thoughts accumulated in his head that he could not share with her. While in the castle, Aru sat on the edge of the bed and examined the sword she found. She was determined to use it if Mr. Dusk did not let her go home and tried to kill her. Suddenly, the sword began to glow, its blade engulfed in flames. The room was filled with bright light, and out of nowhere, a traveler in a white robe appeared in front of the girl, who was with her in the burning house. Aru was worried. She didn't understand what was happening, who he was, and how he got into the room. The traveler was also surprised. He did not know how he got here. Seeing her, he turned to the girl, calling her name. Making his way through the traps, the traveler ran away from the monsters. He wanted to swing his weapon and destroy them all in one fell swoop. In an instant, an unknown force grabbed him, and fire began to blaze around him. The traveler thought that he had fallen into another trap. The girl held the sword tightly with both hands. She looked at the arriving stranger with caution. The man asked her to put down her weapon. He came to save Miss Era. Lowering the sword, the name Morian began to spin in her head. It seemed to her that she had already seen it somewhere. The traveler told the girl that he had arrived from the temple to save her. The traveler's name was indeed Morian. It turned out that they had met before, and after that the girl tried to find him. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Dusk stood outside. He called the girl Sharon and asked to open the door because he wanted to see her. Aru asked to give her a few seconds to get ready. Remembering Mr. Dusk's words about how he destroyed people, Aru feared for Morian's life. She grabbed his hand and pulled him along, deciding to hide him. The long wait seemed strange to Dusk, but as if nothing had happened, Aru opened the doors and smiled sweetly, asking if anything had happened at such a late time. The girl behaved suspiciously well. She told him that she was very tired and was going to go to bed as soon as possible. If he wanted to tell her something, he could do it without entering the room. Throwing open the door, Dusk entered the room. As he entered, he smelled an unfamiliar smell. The girl was surprised, saying that she had eaten sweet potato during the day, and perhaps it could have caused this. Not believing Aru, he said that the root vegetable had nothing to do with it. In her room, Dusk smelled the smell of someone strange. The girl panicked, but did not show it. All this time, Morian was hiding under the girl's bed. He understood that he had no chance of winning the duel against Twilight. Its only advantage was surprise. Looking around, Dusk saw no signs of intrusion. The soul he found in the room belonged to Sharon, but his rage grew. He wanted to burn the room to get rid of the smell. Calling Dusk, Aru spread her arms to the sides and asked to hug her. He was surprised by this act, but the girl explained that this is why he came to her now. She decided to distract him by sharing her magical power with him and then send him to her room. At first, they just hugged, but after a few moments, Dusk took her in his arms. Putting the girl on the bed, he hovered over her and said that tonight he would stay with her. even if she was against it. Aru panicked because there was a person under the bed. The man lit the candles with a snap of his fingers. The girl did not know what to do, realizing that Mr. Dusk had no plans to leave. Aru couldn't fall asleep. She kept thinking about what to do next. Dusk hugged Aru tightly. He had no plans to leave at all. Dusk began to touch her hair and asked why she was not sleeping. The girl was ticklish. She could not sleep because of his presence. It was very awkward to be in the same bed with him. He leaned down and kissed her neck tenderly. Dusk was ready to continue kissing her further. Aru was indignant and asked him to stop. She did not like the man's advances. Having stopped kissing the girl, Dusk said that there was a strange smell of a male in her room, which he did not like. She was at a loss as to what connection there was between the smell and his advances. Aru understands that since he does not like the smell of another man in her room, then he is not indifferent to her. The man touches her hair and inhales its scent. He calls the girl Sharon and admits that he does not want to kill her and never wanted to. Era doesn't like being called by someone else's name. Dusk insists that she really is Sharon, and the proof of this is his heart, which is in her chest. The girl asked why he changed his mind about killing her. He said there was a way to use magic to take the heart without harming her. She wanted to know what this method was, but their conversation was interrupted by a roar that suddenly came from under the bed. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Dusk decided to figure out what that sound was. Aru panicked. She urgently needed to come up with something so that he would not find Morian. Rushing towards Dusk, she took his face with both hands and turned him in her direction. The girl asked not to be distracted by extraneous sounds and to continue talking about the magical method. Aru said that this was a very important problem and suggested that they join forces so that she could return his heart to him. The man hesitated. Her face was too close, he said. She was his. Then he stood up, pointing his finger at her forehead, offering to talk about it next time. Aru rebelled and demanded that he finish his sentence. Dusk put the girl to bed, hugging her, pressing her to his chest, ordering her to sleep. She asked if Mr. Dusk didn't want to return the heart as soon as possible. But he didn't answer. Hesitating a little, he said that regarding her, being here next to her. He fell silent again, then said that it was nothing special. Aru's eyelids seemed to be filled with lead. She thought that in the current situation, she had no choice but to wait until Mr. Dusk fell asleep and then hide Morian in another room. Remembering his kiss, the girl blushed. She believed that she had been put to bed too early. After some time, Aru fell asleep. Dusk used a sleeping spell, so for some time she will sleep like the dead. He stood up, his eyes red, his claws extended. Dusk believed it was time to start hunting the intruder. Waking up, Aru realizes that she fell asleep. Mr. Dusk was not nearby. She looked under the bed, asking Morian's forgiveness and inviting him to crawl out from under the bed. But under the bed it turned out to be empty, and no one responded. Aru was worried about what could happen at night. Dusk looks at his bloody hands. He stands on the riverbank near the place where Aru saw large blocks of ice. He is sad to discover that all the wyverns have been destroyed. Aru explores the room, but still cannot find Morian. She is horrified by the thought, what if while she was sleeping, Mr. Dusk killed him? Morian magically appears in the room. He calls Miss Ara, but she does not pay attention to him. Being in thought, he puts his hand on her shoulder, and she is pretty scared. He asked her to forgive him. Morian did not want to scare the girl, but he had to hide his body to evade the dragon's eye. The man explained that his robe has a protective concealing function. You can hide your presence from prying eyes by simply wearing it. Morian looked around, saying that it was much more important that they were now in the dragon's dwelling. He thought, a little strange for a dragon, the room looked completely normal. Then he remembered Miss Aru's screams at night and turned his face away from her in embarrassment. Aru got scared, thinking. Suddenly, an expression appeared on Morian's face, as if he had suffered severe mental trauma. It suddenly dawned on the girl how Morian knew that Mr. Dusk was a dragon. Sir Morian, now and before, is still the same. Still a mysterious and incomprehensible person, years earlier. Little Zephyr sits on the pier crying and calling for help. His sister fell into the water, but both of them did not know how to swim. There was a flash of light, and little Morian had already dived after the girl. Swimming closer, he saw that Aru was suffocating, holding her by the waist. He touched her lips with his lips, passing air. Morian dragged them to the surface. Zephyr was rushing towards them on the shore. Aru lay on the grass, bursting into tears. She was very grateful to her savior. It was a day that she had forgotten, but when she saw Morian, the memory surfaced on its own. Then she found herself in great debt to him. Funeral. Aru stands with a tear-stained Zephyr. The village people around them pitifully discuss the misfortune that has happened, saying that no one expected that, when sending them to the city, their parents would stumble upon robbers. However, after that day, before Aru could even properly thank Morian, he suddenly disappeared. And 7 years have already passed. Aru suddenly said that she was really grateful to him for saving her, but she was interested in how he ended up here. After all, the girl was sure Mr. Dusk said that no one could enter here. Morian replied that most likely it happened because Miss Aru called him. The man turned around. He emphasized that he would provide a more detailed explanation later. First of all, they need to get out of this place, adding that he is a priest of the Prouse Order, which opposes the dragon. He came here in the first place to protect Miss Ara from the dragon. He knelt before the girl, saying that Miss Aru is the reincarnation of the great hero Sharon. If the dragon gets her heart, a terrible tragedy awaits the world. Dragons are living natural disasters. Morian extended his hand to her, inviting her to go to safety. Aru hesitated, thinking about the fact that he called Mr. Dusk a natural disaster. But was it really so? She knows the story about the terrible dragon by heart, because she has heard it millions of times. But the appearance of Mr. Dusk she saw was very different from what she heard. Aru asked Morian if Mr. Dusk was really a bad dragon. He stood up alarmed, asking what she was saying. The girl continued. Her words may seem strange to Morian, but he is not so ruthless. There's nothing wrong with him looking for his lost heart. Aru believed that her flight with Mr. Dusk's heart beating in her chest was not the right decision from the current situation. The man asked if she intended to return the dragon's heart. The girl nodded silently. Morian was shocked by her answer. He understood that they had a serious problem. Kind and naive, Miss Aru believed everything the dragon told her. Morian said if this is her will, then she leaves him no choice. The man took out his scythe. He asked to be excused for his rudeness, but he would have to take Miss Ara with him by force. A bright light shone. Magical chains appeared and rushed towards the girl. Aru panicked, but she couldn't do anything. Having examined the battle site, Dusk noticed that the attribute of the spells used against the wyverns was ice, and the attribute of the spell cast on Sharon was also ice. Because of the seal on her heart, the magical power accumulated in the girl's body could not come out. All you had to do was just let the magic circulate freely. Although thanks to this, the magical energy was completely used to restore the heart, so Twilight was able to quickly resurrect. But after healing, the excess magic began to tear Sharon's body apart. Having collected all the facts together, Dusk realized that the reason why someone took such steps is that someone wants to get his heart. Dusk went to the ancient ruins. He remembered how Sharon proposed marriage here. His memory flashed back to the moment when he was pierced with a sword. Dusk tormented himself with memories and was in despair. He considered his hopes of achieving something empty. Aru clutched her heart, and for a moment it seemed to be on fire. But what frightened her most was that after what happened, Morian remained lying on the floor. The girl leaned closer to him to check his condition. The man began to come to his senses, and Aru asked him for forgiveness. At that moment, when Morian tried to envelop the girl in magical chains, she found strength in herself, grabbed a sword, and screamed and rushed to cut the chains. Aru warned him that she would not go anywhere against her will, and with a proper swing, she kicked Morian, after which he fell. Apologizing and making excuses to him, the girl said that her body began to move on its own. He also found it strange. He believed that Miss Aru had not received sword training before. However, Morian saw how a moment ago the girl looked like a skilled swordsman. The man suggested that this was to be expected from the reincarnation of the warrior Sharon. The girl said that he himself was to blame for what happened, because he was the first to take out a weapon. She noticed a scratch on his face and was scared. Morian reassured her, saying that he had received it earlier. Having examined him completely, Aru noticed that he looked very exhausted. Morian began to persuade the girl to trust him and go with him to the outside world. She thought that nothing bad would happen if she left for a while, and the heart could be returned after she was home. She wanted to know if everything was okay with Zephyr. Morian said that there is a way to escape. All you need is her consent. Aru asked him if he was hungry, to which Morian replied that he had not eaten or slept for several days. Returning to the castle, Dusk went to Aru and found her with an armful of food, sneaking into her room. He can't believe his eyes what is happening. Dusk inquired about the reason for this behavior. Did he really feed her poorly? He should have just told him that she was hungry and not carry food from the pantry to eat. Aru was indignant. She didn't like that they were talking to her like a pet that was being raised. Dusk untied the knot on the armful of food, and all the food fell on the floor. The girl was depressed. Now she would not be able to bring anything to Morian. Dusk accused Ara of preparing to escape, then said that this was not necessary because he decided to let her go home. At first she hesitated, deciding that there was some kind of catch. But then she exclaimed that she really wanted to go home to see her family as soon as possible. Now it was necessary to somehow communicate this to Morian. Coming closer, Dusk hugged the girl tightly. He said that he could let Aru go, but he had one condition for this. The dragon and the princess sat on the lawn and talked. He asked her how people care for the object of their affection. The princess was surprised by this question. She said that they usually confess their love and give away what they consider valuable to themselves. These can be flowers or jewelry. They mainly exchange rings. After listening to her, he realized that if he presented a gift, he could link his fate with his beloved for the rest of his life. But the princess would not be satisfied with something ordinary. Dusk's condition was the opportunity to sometimes come to the girl, and she would spend time with him. Aru managed to get food for Morian and feed him. She told him about Dusk's proposal. The man did not believe this. He believed that the dragon would never give up his heart. They went out onto the balcony. Morian said that Dusk wanted to make her less vigilant. He proposed to escape today. For this he must go and check the escape route. The girl was saddened. She felt the sincerity in Mr. Dusk's words. She did not need to run away, since he himself would let her go home. Morian asked her not to believe the dragon's words and left. After the man left, Aru stayed on the balcony for a while to think. She noticed that the lights in the castle had gone out everywhere except the windows in the great hall. She became curious about what was going on there and went down to have a look. Entering the room, she saw a large table covered with a variety of treats. Candles were burning everywhere. It was as bright as day. Dusk came out from behind the girl. She asked why there was so much food at such a late hour. He replied that it was their last dinner together. Aru was excited that the man had decided to throw a farewell party. She remembered how at the beginning he also invited her to a large table full of food. Then she was still beside herself and tried to attack him, but he was her savior. But was it really Twilight who saved the girl that day? Aru really liked the treats. She handed the cake to the man and offered to try it. The girl admitted that she felt like she had received a birthday present. Dusk asked when her birthday was. Aru replied that during the time she spent in the castle, she had already turned 19 and reached adulthood.